Have you ever seen an artist completely flip their style? I mean, a change so radical it feels like you're looking at the work of two totally different people. Well, today, we're cracking open one of the most dramatic transformations in the history of architecture. And it turns out, the secret key is a 19th century philosopher. Okay, so take a look at this. On the left, you've got the real house from 1907. It's solid, traditional. It's like a fortress of brick and mortar with a very clear line between what's inside and what's outside. And then, on the right, you have the Farnsworth House from 1950. It's a completely transparent box where the walls have basically vanished, just dissolving the boundary between you and the world around you. And here's the wild part. Both of these were designed by the exact same man, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. So how on earth does an architect go from one extreme to the other? This wasn't just, a simple change in taste. This was a complete revolution in his thinking. To really understand this shift, we have to look way beyond the blueprints and the building materials. And luckily, the architect himself, Mies van der Rohe, he kind of gave us the first clue. He suggested his work was about something much, much deeper than just putting up buildings. Just listen to this quote from him. "Building art is always the spatial execution of spiritual decisions." Spiritual decisions. I mean, wow. He's straight up telling us that his architecture is the physical result of a big philosophical choice. So it's simple. To get the buildings, we have to get the philosophy. And that philosophy came from a pretty surprising place. The 19th century German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. As it turns out, Hegel's big ideas provided the intellectual blueprint for Mies's entire career, his whole architectural journey. At the very heart of Hegel's philosophy is this idea called the dialectic. It sounds kind of academic, but it's a really powerful concept. That all progress, whether it's in history or thought or even art, it all comes from the clash and then the resolution of two opposing forces. Hegel breaks this whole thing down into a simple three-step dance. First, you start with a thesis. That's your initial idea, your status quo. Then that idea is challenged by its polar opposite, the antithesis. The conflict between these two is finally resolved in a synthesis, a new, higher idea that takes the truth from both sides to create something totally new. And this is the exact framework we can use to understand Mies's. All right, so let's put this into practice. We're going to start at the beginning with the thesis. This is the starting point, not just for Hegel's philosophy of the human spirit, but also for Mies's architecture of space. So for Hegel, the thesis is what he calls the subjective spirit. The easiest way to think about it is like a consciousness that is purely inward-looking, totally contained within itself, and defined by its own physical, natural limits. The spirit is just a self-contained entity. Now, this lines up perfectly with Mies's architectural thesis, what we'll call classical space. His earliest buildings are basically the physical version of that subjective spirit. They're contained, they look inward, and they have these heavy, solid walls that create an absolute, undeniable separation between inside and outside. And you can see this so clearly in his early work, like the Real and Wolf houses. Those thick, load-bearing brick walls aren't just there to hold the roof up. They're philosophical statements. They are the natural limitations that contain the space, just like the body contains the subjective spirit. But as Hegel would tell you, every thesis, sooner or later, calls forth its opposite. And in Mies's work, that antithesis arrived in a big way, as a complete and total rejection of that contained box. Hegel called this next stage the objective spirit. This is when the spirit breaks free from its internal little container and starts to exist externally, out in the world, in things like laws and society and culture. It goes from being just in itself to being for itself, out in the open. Mies mirrors this move perfectly with his transitional space. You just have to look at the Barcelona pavilion. Suddenly, the walls aren't holding anything up anymore. They're just these free-floating planes that kind of guide you through the space instead of trapping you in it. The structure is boiled down to these super slender columns, and that hard line between inside and out, it becomes wonderfully, radically ambiguous. This was so revolutionary that even a genius like Frank Lloyd Wright just didn't quite get it. He looked at those thin chrome columns and famously said he wanted Mies to get rid of those damned little posts because he thought they looked weak and dangerous. He totally missed that their very lightness was the point. They were liberating the space, letting it flow outward and become objective. Okay, so this leaves us with a real conflict.
On one hand, we've got the completely enclosed subjective space, and on the other, the completely open objective space. So how does an architect solve this? How do you resolve this dialectic?
Well, Hegel's answer is the synthesis, which he called absolute spirit. And this isn't a compromise. It's not meeting in the middle. It's a brand new, higher state of being where the internal self and the external world become one. It's the moment the subject realizes it's not just in the world, it is the world. And this brings us to Mies's ultimate masterstroke, his creation of universal space. He uses glass to resolve the whole conflict. A glass box, like the Farnsworth house, is the perfect synthesis. Think about it. You are physically contained and protected. That's the thesis. But you are also visually connected to the entire universe. That's the antithesis. You are enclosed and open at the exact same time. This quote about Mies's new National Gallery in Berlin just captures the feeling perfectly. It's the experience of absolute spirit made real, made into a piece of architecture. You get to be both yourself and a part of the world, all at once. So, let's just quickly recap this incredible journey. We went all the way from a simple brick house to a really profound philosophical statement about our place in the entire cosmos. It really does all map perfectly. Hegel's three-stage journey of the spirit, from subjective to objective to absolute, it aligns one-to-one with Mies's architectural evolution, from the enclosed classical space through the flowing transitional space, all the way to the transcendent universal space. But what was the point of it all? Why create this universal space? Well, scholars who've studied Mies argue that this was never about creating a cold, empty void. The whole purpose of this huge, transparent space was to strip away all the little distractions of the world so that a person could confront the universe, and in doing so, truly find themselves. And this all leads back to Mies's powerful and kind of paradoxical personal motto: fulfill the law to gain freedom. It sounds strange, doesn't it? But for him, it meant that by submitting to the strict, rational law of his architectural system, the grid, the structure, he achieved the ultimate freedom, the freedom of a universal space, a space for spiritual self-realization. And all this leaves us with a pretty fascinating question. If Mies's buildings were the spatial execution of Hegelian philosophy, what about the buildings all around us right now? What philosophies are they built on? What spiritual decisions are our homes and our offices and our cities making for us today?